The smell of McDonald's grease has been in my hair for 25 years. But I never thought it would be the smell that would lead me to discover the biggest betrayal of my entire life. I'm Doris. I'm 65 years old, and I live here in Denver, Colorado. I had to take a deep breath before I could even begin to tell you this story, because even now, 6 months later, I can barely believe what my own family did to me. It all started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was working the breakfast shift at our McDonald's on Colfax Avenue, the same McDonald's where I'd been flipping burgers and cleaning tables since I was 40 years old. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I wiped down the same tables I'd been cleaning for a quarter century. My uniform was the same polyester blend that had made me sweat through countless summer rushes and shiver through broken heater winters. I could feel the familiar ache in my lower back as I bent to pick up another discarded straw wrapper. And I let out a long sigh, thinking about how much longer I could keep doing this job. That morning, Sarah from corporate was supposed to come in to discuss my pension benefits. I'd been trying to get information about my retirement fund for months, but every time I called the corporate office, I got transferred from one person to another, and nobody seemed to know anything about my account. My voice was getting smaller each time I had to repeat my employee ID number to yet another representative who claimed they couldn't find my records. I was nervous about the meeting, I'll admit that. I could feel my hands getting clammy as I arranged the chairs in the back office, the same office where I'd been called in for performance reviews and schedule changes over the years. The smell of cleaning solution mixed with the perpetual scent of French fry oil that seemed to seep into every corner of the building. I had to pause and take several deep breaths because something felt different about this meeting, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Before I continue with what happened next, and I need to take a moment here, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories. My voice gets excited just thinking about it, and I'd love to know, what city or state are you listening from right now? I'm curious about this. Drop it in the comments below, or tell me about a time when family disappointed you. I find myself lowering my voice when I say this. Your stories help me know I'm not alone in this. Now, let me tell you what I discovered next, because that was just the beginning of this nightmare. Sarah walked in at exactly 9:30, carrying a manila folder that looked thicker than I expected. She was a woman about my daughter's age, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a business suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. The sound of her high heels clicking on the tile floor echoed through the empty dining area as she made her way to the back office. I could hear the morning rush starting to build outside, the familiar sounds of car doors slamming and drive-through orders crackling through the speakers. She sat across from me at the small table, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she opened the folder. That's when my stomach started to twist into knots. My voice caught when I asked her what was wrong, because the expression on her face wasn't the professional smile I was expecting. She looked like someone who was about to deliver terrible news, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. "Doris," and her voice was softer than I expected, almost gentle. "I need to ask you some questions about your employment here, and I want you to know that you're not in any trouble." The way she said it made me feel like I definitely was in some kind of trouble, and I could feel my heart starting to race. The sound of the ice machine cycling on in the kitchen seemed louder than usual, and I realized I was holding my breath. She asked me who I thought owned this particular McDonald's franchise. I told her what I'd always been told, that it was owned by Morrison Food Services Corporation, a big company that owns several franchises around Colorado. I'd been saying that name for 25 years whenever anyone asked where I worked. My voice was confident when I answered, because I never had any reason to doubt what I'd been told. That's when Sarah's face changed completely. She let out a long breath and looked down at the papers in front of her. "Doris, This franchise hasn't been owned by Morrison Food Services for over 15 years. It's been owned by Mountain View Restaurant Group since 2009. Her voice was getting quieter, and I had to lean forward to hear her clearly over the sound of the breakfast rush starting in the kitchen. I was curious about this discrepancy, so I asked her who owned Mountain View Restaurant Group. I figured it was probably just some corporate restructuring that nobody had bothered to explain to the employees. Companies change names and ownership all the time, right? But as soon as I asked the question, I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. She opened the folder and pulled out a document that looked official, with corporate seals and signatures. Her finger traced down to a name at the bottom of the page, and when she turned it around for me to see, I had to read it 3 times before my brain could process what I was looking at. The owner of Mountain View Restaurant Group, the company that had been my employer for 15 years, was listed as Michael Davis. My son's name is Michael Davis. I let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh because it was so absurd that it had to be some kind of mistake. There must be dozens of Michael Davises in Colorado, right? But Sarah wasn't finished. She pulled out another document, this one with an address listed for the business owner, 4237 Maple Street, Littleton, Colorado. The same address where I'd been sending my son birthday cards and Christmas gifts for the past 12 years. My hands started shaking so badly that I could barely hold the paper. The fluorescent light above us flickered, casting strange shadows across the documents that seemed to make the words blur together. I could feel my voice starting to crack when I asked her if she was absolutely certain about this information. The sound of my own heartbeat was so loud in my ears that I almost missed her answer. She was resigning immediately. I'm sorry, Doris. We've been investigating some irregularities in the pension fund contributions for this location, and that's how we discovered the ownership discrepancy. Your son has been your employer for 15 years, and according to our records, you've never received the pension contributions that should have been made on your behalf. I had to stop and take a breath before I could continue. 25 years I had been working at this McDonald's, thinking I was building toward a secure retirement. I could barely whisper the words when I asked her how much money we were talking about. The smell of the breakfast hash browns cooking in the kitchen suddenly made me feel nauseated, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep myself from falling out of the chair. Sarah pulled out a calculator and started punching in numbers. The sound of each button being pressed seemed to echo in the small office space. I could barely whisper the words when I heard that number, $237,000. That was more money than I had ever imagined having, money that should have been waiting for me when I finally couldn't flip burgers anymore. Money that my own son had been stealing from me for 15 years while I smiled and served customers and cleaned up their messes, never knowing that every shift I worked was making him richer while leaving me with nothing. But that was just the beginning of what I would discover. I had to stop and gather myself before I could continue, because the next part of this story is even worse than what I've told you so far. Sarah explained that the investigation had started when the McDonald's corporate office noticed that this location was reporting unusually low labor costs compared to other franchises in the area. When they dug deeper, they found that several long-term employees were missing from the official payroll records, even though they were clearly working full-time hours. My name was one of the missing employees. I was curious about something, and that's when I realized the truth was even darker. I had to pause here because what came next was unbelievable. For the past 15 years, I hadn't technically been an employee of McDonald's at all. According to the official records, I was listed as an independent contractor providing cleaning and maintenance services to the restaurant. This classification meant that I not only wasn't eligible for pension contributions, but I wasn't entitled to health insurance, overtime pay, or any of the other benefits that McDonald's employees receive. My son had been paying me exactly minimum wage for 25 years, but he'd been billing McDonald's corporate for my full-time employee benefits and pocketing the difference. The health insurance that I thought was being deducted from my paycheck, he was collecting that money from corporate and keeping it. The overtime hours I worked during busy periods, he was billing corporate for time and a half and paying me regular wages. The sound of the lunch rush starting to build in the dining room felt surreal as Sarah continued to explain the scope of the fraud. I could hear customers placing orders for Big Macs and French fries while my entire world was falling apart in this tiny office that smelled like industrial cleaning products and broken dreams. My voice was getting smaller and smaller as the reality of the situation sunk in. But the worst part was still coming, and I could feel my voice getting smaller just thinking about it. Sarah pulled out another document, this one with my signature on it. It was an employment agreement dated 15 years ago, right around the time that Michael had told me he'd gotten me a promotion that would give me more job security. I remembered signing it, remembered how proud he seemed that he'd been able to help his mother get better working conditions. What I was actually signing was an agreement to waive my rights to employee benefits in exchange for flexible scheduling and independent contractor status. The document was written in such complicated legal language that I never understood what I was agreeing to. My own son had tricked me into signing away my rights to a secure retirement, and I thanked him for it. I let out a long sigh and realized that every conversation I'd had with Michael over the years suddenly made horrible sense. When I complained about not getting raises, he'd tell me that McDonald's corporate was being stingy with all the franchise employees. When I asked about my health insurance coverage, he'd explain that the corporate policies were complicated and he was looking into it for me. When I mentioned wanting to plan for retirement, he'd assure me that he was taking care of everything and I didn't need to worry. He'd been taking care of everything all right. He'd been taking care of stealing every penny that should have been securing my future. The investigation had revealed that this wasn't just happening to me. Michael owned 3 different McDonald's locations around the Denver area, and he'd been running the same scam on several long-term employees at each location. Elderly workers who trusted him, who were grateful for steady employment, who never questioned the paperwork they were asked to sign. The total amount of stolen benefits and wages across all 3 locations was over $1.2 million. Little did they know what was waiting for them. I could hear the satisfaction creeping into my voice when Sarah told me that the corporate investigation had already resulted in criminal charges being filed. The FBI had been building a case against Michael for months, using the McDonald's corporate investigation as a starting point to uncover what they were calling systematic elder exploitation in the restaurant industry. But here's what Michael didn't know, and what I was about to discover would change everything. Sarah had one more document in her folder, this one with the McDonald's corporate logo at the top. It was a letter addressed to me personally, signed by the regional vice president of McDonald's Corporation. The letter explained that McDonald's was taking full responsibility for failing to detect the fraud earlier, and they were prepared to make complete restitution to all affected employees. But more than that, they were offering me something I never expected. Because of my 25 years of loyal service and the circumstances of the fraud, McDonald's was offering me a settlement that would not only restore my stolen pension benefits, but would also include damages for emotional distress and lost wages. The total settlement amount was $450,000. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My voice caught with excitement when I asked Sarah to repeat the number because it seemed impossible that this nightmare could actually have a positive ending. $450,000 was more money than I had ever dreamed of having. It was enough to retire comfortably, to buy a small house somewhere warm, to finally stop worrying about every grocery store purchase and every doctor's visit. But they had no idea what I was about to do next. I could hear the mischief creeping into my voice when I started thinking about my options. The McDonald's settlement was just the beginning of what Michael was going to lose. Sarah explained that as a part of the corporate investigation, McDonald's was terminating their franchise agreement with Mountain View Restaurant Group immediately. Michael would lose all 3 restaurant locations, and the corporate office was already in the process of transferring the franchises to new owners. His entire business empire was about to disappear overnight. But that wasn't enough for me. Not after 25 years of being lied to by my own son. Not after working double shifts to help pay for his college education while he was secretly stealing my retirement money. Not after all the times I'd covered for him when he missed family gatherings because he was so busy with the restaurant business. I had been planning this for weeks, ever since Sarah first contacted me about the investigation. My voice took on a knowing quality when I told her that I wanted to press individual criminal charges against Michael, separate from the corporate case. I wanted him to face his mother in court and explain to a judge why he thought it was acceptable to steal from a 65-year-old woman who trusted him completely. Sarah seemed surprised by my determination. I think she expected me to be satisfied with the financial settlement and want to put the whole mess behind me, but I could feel something that I hadn't felt in years, a sense of power, of control over my own life. For 25 years, I'd been grateful for whatever scraps people threw my way, but now I knew what I was worth, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me ever again. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. Michael was arrested on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week when Sarah had first told me about the investigation. I wasn't there to see it happen, but I heard from other family members that the FBI agents showed up at his house at 6 a.m. with a warrant for his arrest, and another warrant to seize his financial records. My daughter Linda called me crying, asking how I could do this to my own son. My voice carried all the irony I felt when I told her that I wasn't the one who had done anything. Michael was the one who chose to steal from his mother for 15 years. She tried to guilt me into dropping the charges, telling me that I was destroying the family and that Michael had 3 children to support. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped when she said that. Michael's children were going to be just fine. They had trust funds that he'd been funding with money stolen from me and other elderly employees. His oldest daughter was already in college, a college that my stolen pension money had helped pay for. His youngest son played on expensive travel sports teams that my unpaid overtime hours had subsidized. But the universe wasn't done with them yet. I could hear the mischief in my own voice when I remembered what happened next. Michael's wife, Jennifer, had always been cordial to me at family gatherings, but she'd never been particularly warm. She was one of those women who smiled with her mouth, but never with her eyes. And I'd always gotten the impression that she thought I was an embarrassment to the family. Just a working-class grandmother who smelled like French fry oil and didn't understand their sophisticated lifestyle. 2 weeks after Michael's arrest, Jennifer showed up at my apartment unannounced. I could hear desperation in her voice when she started begging me to reconsider pressing charges. She explained that their house was being foreclosed on because the FBI had frozen their bank accounts. Their cars had been repossessed. The children were going to have to change schools because they could no longer afford the private academy tuition. She offered to pay me back personally if I would just drop the criminal charges. She promised me $50,000 in cash if I would sign a document stating that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. My voice dropped to barely above a whisper when I told her that $50,000 wouldn't even cover 1 year of the pension contributions that Michael had stolen from me. That's when she made a mistake that revealed just how little this family had ever respected me. She started crying and told me that I was being selfish, that I didn't understand what it was like to have real responsibilities. She said that I'd lived my whole life as a simple person with simple needs, and that I couldn't possibly understand the pressure that Michael was under to maintain their lifestyle. I let out a long breath before I responded because I wanted to make sure I said exactly what I meant to say. I told Jennifer that she was absolutely right. I was a simple person with simple needs. My simple needs included things like having enough money to buy groceries without counting every dollar, being able to go to the doctor when I was sick, and having some security in my old age. Simple needs that her husband had stolen from me so that she could drive a BMW and vacation in Mexico every winter. The words came out between what I can only describe as a mixture of tears and laughter when I told her that Michael wasn't the victim in this situation. I was the victim. Every elderly employee that he defrauded was the victim. And if maintaining their lifestyle required stealing from senior citizens who worked minimum wage jobs, then maybe their lifestyle needed to change. Jennifer left my apartment that day, and I never saw her again. But I heard through the family grapevine that she'd filed for divorce within a week of that conversation. Apparently, she had no idea about the extent of Michael's fraud. And when she found out that their entire marriage had been funded by stolen money, she decided she couldn't be part of it anymore. The trial took place 6 months later in the Jefferson County Courthouse in Golden, Colorado. I had never been inside a courtroom before, and the formal atmosphere was intimidating at first. The smell of floor wax and old wood reminded me of the church where I had taken Michael to Sunday school when he was a little boy, back when I thought I was raising him to be an honest man. Michael looked different when they brought him in wearing the Orange County Jail uniform. He lost weight and his hair had gone completely gray. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. He was still my son, after all. But then I remembered 25 years of minimum wage paychecks while he was getting rich off my labor, and the sympathy disappeared. My voice was full of excitement as I tell you this. The prosecutor had done an incredible job building the case. They had financial records, employee testimonies, corporate documents, and even recorded phone calls where Michael instructed his bookkeeper to falsify employee classifications. The evidence was so overwhelming that Michael's lawyer advised him to plead guilty and hope for a reduced sentence. But Michael wasn't ready to give up. He took the stand in his own defense and tried to paint himself as a struggling small business owner who had made some accounting errors under financial pressure. I couldn't help but laugh when I remembered his testimony, because the prosecutor had financial records showing that Michael's restaurants had been consistently profitable throughout the entire 15-year period. He was taking home over $200,000 a year in salary and bonuses while paying me $7.25 an hour. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head held high for the first time in years. I could see Michael sitting at the defendant's table, and for just a moment, our eyes met. I saw something there that I'd never seen before. Shame. Real, genuine shame. And that's when I knew that somewhere deep inside, my son understood exactly what he had done to me. I told the jury about 25 years of getting up at 4:30 in the morning to open the restaurant, about working double shifts when other employees called in sick, about cleaning up vomit and mopping floors and scraping gum off tables while my son collected corporate payments for benefits I never received, about lying awake at night worrying about how I was going to afford my medications when I got too old to work. The words came out stronger than I expected, and I realized that I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that McDonald's office 6 months earlier. That woman had been grateful for whatever scraps life threw her way. This woman knew her worth, and she wasn't going to apologize for demanding what was rightfully hers. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they came back with a guilty verdict on all charges, I felt something that I hadn't felt in decades: complete vindication. My voice was full of satisfaction when the judge sentenced Michael to 5 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all affected employees. But the judge wasn't finished. In a move that surprised everyone in the courtroom, including the lawyers, she ordered Michael to write a personal letter of apology to each employee he had defrauded, to be read aloud in court and entered into the public record. She said that financial restitution wasn't enough for crimes that had betrayed such fundamental trust, and that the victims deserved to hear their employer acknowledge the full scope of what they had done. Michael's letter to me was 3 pages long, and I still have it framed on my kitchen table. In it, he admitted that he had betrayed not only his mother, but also the values that I had tried to teach him as a child. He acknowledged that there was no excuse for what he had done, and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to find a way to make amends. Reading that letter was the closest thing to closure that I could have hoped for, not because it changed what had happened, but because it meant that Michael finally understood the magnitude of his actions. He wasn't making excuses or trying to justify his behavior. He was taking full responsibility for destroying his mother's trust and security. Their faces when they realized the truth, I still laugh when I think about the day the settlements were finalized. The McDonald's corporate settlement, combined with the restitution ordered by the court, meant that I received over $600,000, more money than I had ever imagined having, enough to completely change my life. I used part of the money to buy a small house in Pueblo, Colorado, about an hour south of Denver. It has 2 bedrooms, a nice kitchen with modern appliances, and a backyard where I can grow tomatoes and peppers. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have to worry about making rent payments or whether I can afford to repair something when it breaks. I also used some of the money to establish a scholarship fund at the community college in Pueblo. It's specifically for older students who are trying to change careers or finish degrees that they started years ago but never completed. I call it the Second Chances Scholarship, and every year I get to meet with the recipients and hear their stories. Some people might think I'm crazy for giving away money that I could have kept for myself, but I learned something important during this whole experience. Having enough money to feel secure is wonderful, but having enough money to help other people feel secure is even better. The most unexpected part of all this has been the response from other McDonald's employees around the country. After the story was covered in the local news, I started getting phone calls and letters from workers at other franchises who had suspicions about their own employment situations. With the help of McDonald's corporate legal department, we've been able to identify and investigate several similar cases of franchise fraud. It turns out that what Michael was doing wasn't as unique as we'd originally thought. There's apparently a whole network of franchise owners who specifically target older employees because they assume that we won't ask questions or understand our rights. They prey on people who are grateful to have jobs and who trust their employers to treat them fairly. But they picked the wrong group of people to mess with. Senior citizens might be easy to fool in the short term, but we have something that younger workers often don't have: time. Time to investigate, time to ask questions, time to pursue legal action, and time to make sure that justice gets done. I've become something of an accidental activist in my retirement. I speak at senior centers and community colleges about workers' rights, helping people understand how to recognize when they're being taken advantage of by their employers. I work with legal aid organizations to connect elderly workers with attorneys who specialize in employment fraud cases. The work is rewarding in ways that flipping burgers never was. Instead of serving food to people who barely acknowledge my existence, I'm helping people reclaim their dignity and their financial security. Instead of cleaning up other people's messes, I'm helping clean up the mess of systematic exploitation that too many companies think they can get away with. Michael was released from federal prison 8 months ago. He's living in a halfway house in Colorado Springs, working at a construction company, and trying to rebuild his life. We don't have a relationship anymore. That trust can never be repaired. But I don't hate him. I feel sorry for him because he threw away his family and his integrity for money that he didn't even need. My other children have gradually come around to understanding my decision to press charges. It took time, and some of them still think I was too harsh, but they've seen how the settlement money has allowed me to live with dignity and purpose, and they've seen how the advocacy work has given me a sense of meaning that I never had during my working years. Linda, who had initially been so upset about Michael's arrest, actually apologized to me last Christmas. She said that she'd been so focused on protecting Michael that she hadn't really thought about what he had done to me. She admitted that if someone had stolen her retirement fund, she would have been just as determined to see them face consequences. The grandchildren are still sorting through their feelings about their father's crimes. His oldest daughter, who's now in her junior year of college, wrote me a letter saying that she was ashamed of how her education had been funded and that she wanted to work to pay back some of the money. I wrote back and told her that she wasn't responsible for her father's choices, but I was proud of her for caring about doing the right thing. Last month, McDonald's corporate invited me to speak at their National Franchise Owners Conference in Chicago. They wanted me to tell my story as part of their ongoing effort to prevent employment fraud at their locations. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of franchise owners and corporate executives, I felt something that I'd never experienced during my 25 years at working at McDonald's. Respect. They listened to every word I said. They asked thoughtful questions about how to better protect elderly employees. They implemented new policies requiring independent verification of employment classifications and benefit contributions. They created a hotline where workers can report suspected fraud anonymously. It was surreal to be treated as an expert and a valued voice in the same industry where I'd spent decades being invisible. The same corporate executives who had never known my name when I was just another uniform behind a counter were now seeking my advice on employee relations and fraud prevention. I'm 70 years old now, and I wake up every morning with a sense of purpose that I never had during my working years. The smell of coffee brewing in my own kitchen has replaced the smell of McDonald's grease that used to cling to my clothes. The sound of birds chirping in my backyard has replaced the incessant beeping of fast food equipment. But most importantly, I wake up knowing that I fought back. I didn't just accept being victimized and move on with my life. I stood up for myself and for other people who were being exploited the same way. I proved that being 65 years old and working a minimum wage job doesn't mean you're powerless. The universe wasn't done with me yet, it turned out. All those years when I thought I was just surviving, I was actually preparing for something bigger. Every double shift I worked gave me the strength to endure the stress of a legal battle. Every customer complaint I handled taught me how to stay calm under pressure. Every year of financial struggle taught me the true value of money and security. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd never asked about my pension fund, if I'd just continued working at McDonald's until I was physically unable to do the job anymore. I probably would have ended up with nothing, no savings, no retirement benefits, no security in my old age. I would have been completely dependent on Social Security and whatever help my children were willing to provide. Instead, I'm financially independent for the first time in my life. I can afford to be generous with my time and my money because I don't have to worry about my own basic needs being met. I can choose how to spend my days based on what's meaningful to me, not just on what pays the bills. The advocacy work has connected me with other senior citizens who refuse to be invisible or powerless. We share resources, support each other through legal battles, and celebrate each victory against age discrimination and exploitation. We've discovered that there's real strength in community, especially when that community is made up of people who have lived long enough to know the difference between right and wrong. My voice gets excited just thinking about the cases we've won over the past few years. Restaurant workers who discovered their tip money was being stolen by managers. Home health aides who weren't being paid for travel time between clients. Retail employees who were being forced to work off the clock during inventory periods. Each victory makes all of us stronger and more determined to keep fighting. The phone calls still come regularly. people who have heard my story and want advice about their own employment situations. Some of them are afraid to rock the boat because they need their jobs. Others are ready to fight but don't know where to start. All of them deserve better than what they're getting, and most of them have more power than they realize. I tell them what I wish someone had told me 25 years ago. That knowing your worth isn't arrogant, it's necessary. That asking questions about your benefits isn't being difficult, it's being responsible. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential for your survival and dignity. I also tell them that it's never too late to change your situation. I was 65 when I discovered what was happening to me, and I still had time to fight back and win. Age isn't a weakness, it's an advantage. We have experience, patience, and perspective that younger workers often lack. We've seen enough of life to know when we're being treated unfairly, and we care enough about justice to do something about it. The McDonald's where I worked for 25 years is still operating under new ownership. I drive by it occasionally when I'm visiting friends in Denver, and it looks exactly the same as it always did. The same fluorescent lights, the same red and yellow color scheme, the same smell of French fries drifting out every time someone opens the door. But I'm not the same person who used to work there. That woman was grateful for any job that would have her, willing to accept whatever wages and benefits she was offered, afraid to ask questions or make demands. This woman knows her value and isn't afraid to insist on being treated accordingly. Sometimes I go through the drive-thru just to see if I recognize any of the employees. Most of them are young people earning spending money for school or saving up for cars. But occasionally I see someone my age, someone who reminds me of myself. 5 years ago, working hard, being grateful for the opportunity, assuming that their employer had their best interests at heart. When I see those workers, I want to tell them to ask questions, to request written documentation of their employment status and benefit contributions, to understand their rights under federal labor laws, to never assume that longevity with an employer guarantees fair treatment or honest dealing. But mostly, I want them to know that they matter, that their years of service have value beyond just the minimum wage they're being paid, that they deserve security and respect and dignity regardless of their age or education level or the color of their uniform. My story isn't just about McDonald's or franchise fraud or pension theft. It's about recognizing that every person has inherent worth that can't be diminished by their job title or their paycheck. It's about understanding that being victimized doesn't make you a victim. Fighting back is what makes you a survivor. The settlement money will eventually run out, though I'm careful with it, and it should last for the rest of my life. The advocacy work will eventually be taken over by younger people with more energy and better computer skills. But the lesson I learned during this experience, that I have the power to change my situation no matter how hopeless it seems, that lesson will stay with me forever. I'm proud of the woman I became during this fight, not just because I won, but because I had the courage to try. For 65 years, I had let other people determine my worth and my future. It took a betrayal by my own son to teach me that the only person who can really protect my interests is me. That knowledge has made me fearless in ways that surprise even me. I'm not afraid to send back food that's prepared incorrectly. I'm not afraid to question medical bills that seem too high. I'm not afraid to hang up on telemarketers or ignore guilt trips from family members who want me to make decisions based on their convenience instead of my own well-being. I'm not afraid of anything anymore because I know that whatever challenges come my way, I have the strength and the knowledge to handle them. I proved that to myself when I took on a multi-million-dollar corporation and won. Everything else feels manageable after that. The best part of my new life isn't the financial security, though that's wonderful. It isn't the recognition or the speaking opportunities, though those are gratifying. The best part is waking up every morning knowing that I matter, that my voice counts, that my experience has value, that my 70 years of living have given me wisdom worth sharing. I spent too many years trying to be invisible, trying not to be a burden, trying to be grateful for whatever scraps people threw my way. Now I take up space unapologetically. I speak my mind without worrying about whether people will like what I have to say. I demand fair treatment because I know I deserve it. The grandchildren have started calling me more often, and I think they're beginning to understand that their grandmother isn't just a sweet old lady who makes cookies and sends birthday cards. I'm a woman who fought a legal battle against their father and won. I'm someone who rebuilt her entire life at the age of 65. I'm proof that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. My youngest granddaughter, who's now 16, told me recently that I inspire her to be braver in her own life. She said that watching me fight back against injustice has taught her that she doesn't have to accept being treated poorly just because she's young or female or inexperienced. That conversation meant more to me than any settlement check or legal victory ever could. I think about that conversation often when I'm working in my garden or reading in my favorite chair by the window. The tomatoes I grow now taste better than any food I ever served at McDonald's, not because they're objectively superior, but because I chose to plant them. I watered them. I watched them grow. They're mine in a way that nothing in my life had been mine for decades. The small victories matter as much as the big ones. Being able to buy name brand groceries instead of always choosing the cheapest option. Being able to turn up the heat in winter without calculating the cost. Being able to replace my old car with something reliable that won't leave me stranded. These might seem like simple things, but they represent a freedom that I had almost forgotten was possible. I still smell McDonald's grease sometimes when I walk past fast food restaurants. And for just a moment, I'm transported back to those early morning shifts when my back ached and my feet hurt, and I wondered if I'd ever be able to stop working. But now that smell doesn't make me sad. It reminds me of how far I've come and how much I've overcome. The legal victory was important, but the personal transformation has been life-changing. I discovered that I'm much stronger than I ever knew. I learned that my voice matters and my experience has value. I found out that fighting for justice isn't just about getting money back. It's about reclaiming your dignity and your sense of self-worth. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to rewrite your story. For 65 years, I thought my story was about being grateful for whatever life gave me and trying not to ask for too much. Now I know that my story is about recognizing my own value and refusing to settle for less than I deserve. The phone rang this morning while I was having my coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. It was another elderly worker who had heard about my case and wanted advice about her own situation. She works at a nursing home where she suspects the management has been stealing from the employee tip pool, and she's afraid to speak up because she needs the job. My voice was full of confidence when I told her that she already has more power than she realizes, that there are laws protecting workers from retaliation when they report wage theft, that there are organizations willing to help her investigate and pursue legal action if necessary, that she doesn't have to choose between keeping her job and being treated fairly. But mostly, I told her what I wish someone had told me 25 years ago. That she matters. That her years of service have created value that belongs to her. That asking for fair treatment isn't being greedy or difficult. That she has every right to expect honesty and respect from her employer. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about how many conversations like that I've had over the past 5 years. How many people have reached out because they needed someone to tell them that they weren't crazy for thinking they were being cheated? How many workers have found the courage to speak up after hearing about my experience? That's when I realized that Michael's betrayal, as painful as it was, had actually given me something precious. A purpose that goes beyond my own needs and desires. If he hadn't stolen from me, I never would have discovered the extent of elder exploitation in the workplace. I never would have learned about my own strength and resilience. I never would have become someone who helps other people fight back against injustice. I'm not grateful for what he did. The pain and the betrayal and the years of financial insecurity were real and terrible. But I am grateful for who I became because of how I responded to what he did. I'm grateful for the opportunity to use my experience to help other people. I'm grateful for the chance to prove that being older doesn't mean being powerless. Tomorrow, I'm driving to Grand Junction to speak at a senior center about workers' rights. Next week, I'm meeting with a legal aid attorney about a case involving exploited home health workers. Next month, I'm testifying before the state legislature about proposed changes to employment fraud laws. My calendar is full of activities that matter to me. Activities that use my experience and knowledge to make a difference in other people's lives. I never had that when I was working at McDonald's. I was just showing up, doing my job, collecting my paycheck, and going home. I wasn't building toward anything meaningful or contributing to something larger than myself. Now every day feels purposeful. Every conversation has the potential to change someone's life for the better. Every legal victory makes it harder for employers to exploit vulnerable workers. Every speech I give might inspire someone to stand up for themselves or seek help when they're being mistreated. The woman who walked into that McDonald's office 5 years ago thought her story was almost over. She was tired, discouraged, and resigned to a future of struggling to get by on Social Security benefits. She couldn't imagine that anything significant would ever happen to her again. But that woman was wrong. Her story was just beginning. The most important chapters of her life were still ahead of her, waiting to be written herself. I wake up every morning now knowing that I'm the author of my own story. I decide what matters to me. I choose how to spend my time and energy. I determine what legacy I want to leave behind. That power belongs to me, and no one can take it away from me ever again. The smell of fresh coffee and the sound of birds chirping outside my window, these are the sensory details that define my mornings now. Not the fluorescent lights and industrial cleaning products of a fast food kitchen. Not the ache in my back from standing for 8 hours straight. Not the worry about whether I'll have enough money to pay my bills at the end of the month. My hands are softer now because I'm not constantly washing them with industrial soap or handling greasy equipment. My clothes smell like the fabric softener I choose, not like French fry oil that no amount of washing could completely eliminate. My schedule is my own, determined by my priorities and interests rather than by someone else's need for cheap labor. These changes might seem small, but they represent a fundamental shift in how I see myself and how I move through the world. I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm thriving. I'm not just grateful for whatever I can get, I'm actively pursuing what I want and deserve. The settlement money gave me financial security, but the fight itself gave me something even more valuable. The knowledge that I can handle whatever life throws at me, that I don't have to accept being treated poorly just because I'm older or because I need the income, that I have rights and resources and people who will support me when I stand up for myself. 5 years ago, if someone had told me that I would be traveling around Colorado giving speeches about workers' rights, I would have laughed at them. If they had told me that I would own my own home and have money in the bank and feel confident about my future, I would have thought they were delusional. But here I am, doing work that I love, living in a home that I own, surrounded by people who respect my opinions and value my contributions. I'm proof that it's never too late to change your circumstances, no matter how impossible it might seem. The best part isn't the money or the recognition or even the justice, though all of those things are wonderful. The best part is knowing that I matter, that my life has meaning and purpose, that the years I spent being overlooked and undervalued weren't wasted because they prepared me for something bigger and more important. Every elderly worker who finds the courage to report wage theft, every senior citizen who refuses to be invisible, every older person who demands fair treatment, they're all part of my legacy now. They're proof that fighting back isn't just about personal vindication. It's about creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their age or their job or their circumstances. I'm 70 years old and I'm just getting started. I have energy and purpose and dreams for the future that extend far beyond my own needs. I have work to do, people to help and changes to make in the world around me. The woman who worked at McDonald's for 25 years was invisible to most people who encountered her. But the woman I am now, the advocate, the speaker, the fighter for justice, she's impossible to ignore. She takes up space. She speaks truth to power. She refuses to be silenced or sidelined or forgotten. That transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy. It required me to let go of a lifetime of conditioning that told me to be grateful, be quiet, don't make waves, don't ask for too much. It required me to believe that I deserved better and then to do the hard work of fighting for it. But it was worth it. Every difficult moment, every scary legal proceeding, every uncomfortable conversation with family members who didn't understand my choices. It was worth it because it led me to a life that I never could have imagined for myself. A life of purpose and meaning and genuine self-respect. The McDonald's where I worked is still serving customers, still making profits, still operating under the same basic business model. But it's operating more honestly now because of the changes that resulted from my case. The workers there have better protections and clearer information about their rights. The oversight is stronger and the accountability is real. I drive by there sometimes and think about the woman I used to be. Grateful for the job, afraid to ask questions, resigned to whatever treatment she received. I feel compassion for her because she was doing the best she could with what she knew at the time. But I also feel proud of what she became when she finally found the courage to demand better. That courage is available to everyone. It's not something you're born with or without. It's something you develop through practice and support, and the gradual recognition of your own worth. It grows stronger every time you use it, and it spreads to other people when they see what's possible. My story isn't unique in its details, but it might be unique in its outcome. Too many elderly workers accept exploitation because they don't know their options or because they're afraid of the consequences of speaking up. Too many people in vulnerable situations resign themselves to unfair treatment because fighting back seems impossible or too risky. But impossible things happen every day when people find the courage to try. Justice prevails more often than we expect when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. Change occurs when individuals decide that the status quo isn't good enough and that they're willing to work for something better. I'm living proof that 70 years old isn't too old to start over, that minimum wage jobs don't define your worth as a human being, that family relationships built on exploitation aren't worth preserving, that standing up for yourself is always the right choice, even when it's difficult or scary or lonely. The sun is setting outside my kitchen window as I finish telling you this story, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that remind me that every ending is also a beginning. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to help people, new chances to speak up for justice, new ways to use my experience to make the world a little bit better. I couldn't help but smile when I realized that this story, which started with the worst betrayal of my life, has become the foundation for the best years of my life. Sometimes the things that break us apart are actually breaking us open, opening us up to possibilities we never could have seen when we were trying so hard to hold everything together. The smell of McDonald's grease will always remind me of where I came from, but it doesn't define where I'm going. I'm going forward into a future that I'm creating for myself, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of courage at a time. And that's a future worth fighting for.